I hope you'll enjoy as much as I have digging out all the details. My first slide is black, so I don't actually know when it's up and ready or not, so I'm just going to give you my introduction first. You're lucky actually, because this was intended originally to be much more interactive, and it doesn't really work when you've only got sort of 5 people doing the actions. So lucky you, there's actually less science now about this presentation, so hopefully everyone will be able to follow along. So just a little bit of a brief touch on that, I suppose, is that light itself, obviously we've got plenty around us. I'm sure you do at home as well. It actually exists in a state of one of the smallest things that we know. It's about the same size of the smallest particle that everything else is, and that everything else is made up of particles of a similar size that make something larger and more tangible, things that we can touch. But it's all those other things make up something that we can actually hold on to, but light remains that small particle, and it's what actually allows us to see all those other things that are made up. And just to give you the opposite side, darkness. And just in case you're wondering, darkness doesn't actually exist. I know that might stump you straight away, but darkness isn't actually a tangible thing. It's not there, it's not made up of anything. It's actually the absence of light, and light is made up of something. So that's what we're going to be having a look at tonight. As Grant said, the title of my talk is up there. Bang. That worked, which is fantastic. All right, we'll jump on to our next slide. So this is, if you like, man's latest achievement in this field of research. This was a photograph from February in 2018. It was published in Optical Physics. This is the first time that they've managed to smash 3 photons of light together to make a molecule. So what you're seeing there is actually not visible to the naked eye. And this is something, if you like, that man has made. Light, as I said, only exists in its own individual particles, usually. And as all other things that we know are, those particles make up the atoms, and the atoms make up the elements that we know of, and then molecules after that are the larger sizes of things. So your particles are your electrons, your neutrons and your protons, and there's an extended list of that's ever growing. Photons are in that range, so a particle of light is a photon. But the electrons, neutrons and protons, and the number of those is what actually designates what the element is. So you've all seen a periodic table, I'm sure, and the numbers on the chart are telling you how many of those individual components it has, and that will make it something completely different, which on its own, when you actually stop and think about it, is just astounding that you can change the number of an electron in something and it makes it a completely different substance. When you combine the elements together, you make molecules. So we all know good old H2O. I'll start there, which is two atoms of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen, and that makes up a molecule of water, which is what we then call it. There's plenty of others around us that we need. Some ones that you might be more familiar with are O3, which is our ozone, maybe NaCl, which is good old sodium chloride, or the salt that you'll stick on your chips. Or there's particularly a lot of those out there trying to avoid these at the moment, which is the C6H12O6s, which is the good old carbs, a bit of glucose. So there's a few people trying to avoid those at this point in time. Trying to flatten the curve is what we do, not fatten the curve, as they say. So we're just going to have a quick read there in Genesis 1, which is God's first achievement. Genesis 1, verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And looking through this, what actually probably stood out to me most, not what you think, but these are God's first words. I've got 3 kids of my own, and that's something that you're waiting for. There's lots of mumbling, but then there's the intelligible words. But these are God's first words ever. Let there be light, and there was light. And by that, we can obviously see all things. And verse 4, we'll just read through, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So right back here, right in the very beginning, we had God separating the light that he saw was good, something that was actually made of something, and the darkness he's put over there. So, this picture that we've got, this is man's achievement, something that's barely visible, and yet, and it's made up of what God has already made. Yet, if we go on to our next one, this is more of a heavenly scale of light. Our natural light that we get everywhere is made up of burning gases or stars, as we better know them. And the stars can be measured in general, by a solar radius or a solar mass. Don't want to get too much into the numbers of those, other than a solar mass is 2 times 10 to the power of 30 kilograms, which I found out is actually a nonillion, is a 2 with 30 zeros afterward. So the stars can be small and bright, or they can be large and dull, just as examples. But as a size example, we've got Betelgeuse. We know it's upside down for us here in the shoulder of Orion, or it's kind of in his bottom corner now. But that star, as an example, is approximately 1,180 times bigger than our sun. If you put it where our sun was, it would go past Jupiter. And we have people talking about struggling to fly to Mars and back, and Jupiter isn't even on the radar, sort of thing, and this star is that big. So there's some pretty amazing things out there that are producing this light now that God has put in place. And we read about the Old Testament God, if you like, back there in Genesis, and you'll see here we turn to John, and we'll read about the New Testament that God has put in place. And we'll skip through a few of these verses. Verse 1 and 2, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the same was in the beginning with God. Verse 4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Verse 8, he was not that light, capital L now, we're talking about John the Baptist, but he was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light. We're talking about Jesus now, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. And verse 12, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And just at the start of verse 14 there, we know it goes on to continue to talk about Jesus. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. So we've got the beginning and the Word and God. They are all there together. We're talking about back in Genesis again, that we just read before. And that, that it is the light of men. That is what life is, something that actually awakens you. And that it was, lowercase l, it was a light in the darkness, something pretty special. And that Jesus would be the true light for every man. And that all mankind, that anyone, and this is the one that gets me, that would receive or could receive, they'd be given power to be the sons of God. We know this is a term here, sons, daughters, put in there whatever you want, that it's calling us to actually be true or heirs and joint heirs with the living God. So there was a time, this is a place that we like to go, up in Cooper Pedy, and they managed to get this picture, the blackout at the end of a meeting. That's the Milky Way there, hanging over the meeting hall, that's underground, and you can just see the incredible majesty of that. That's just our very own galaxy that we're in the middle of, and it's bright enough to light the night, even when it's dark. You can actually, just by the light of the stars, you can actually walk, and you've got plenty of ability to see. And this to me, it kind of reminded me or struck me as we talk about Saul's first encounter in Acts chapter 9, that there was a light that shined round about him, a light from heaven. And to me, I think of a spot like we have here on the stage. If you imagine the hall was black and there's a spotlight on me, but we're talking about daytime here. We're talking about Saul was walking along the road to Damascus, and during the daytime there was a light that shone round about him. That's the sort of light that we were just reading about back there in John. And although, as we read here in John 14, as some would know him, this is Doubting Thomas, and he wasn't sure about where Jesus was going, which probably means he wasn't really all that sure about where Jesus came from either. And he was obviously just a bit confused here, but as we read in John 14 and in verse 6, I forgot to turn there, so I'm just going to pull it up. And Jesus said unto him, Thomas, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. So we're talking about here that Jesus is giving us a pretty clear example that God has set things in motion. He's told us that Jesus was going to be the next step, and he's also given us the reason why, if you like, that he is the door, as it says elsewhere in John, that we use Jesus to enter into the place where the Father is. And this is what we have, isn't it? This is Jesus' own words now explaining to us what we read back in John chapter 1, that he was actually, we're not just being told that he was that light, but he's confirming with us that he is, as we got there, the way, the truth, and the life. And when we think about Jesus, there's probably one thing that comes to mind for most people, and that would be about his sacrifice. But this is actually our first fire of the fire season. We made some beautiful baked potatoes and marshmallows on that. They were fantastic. But fire it was the first man-made light, the first time that man could actually make something that was similar to the majesty of what God made. And without fire, man actually couldn't have made a single other thing that we have today. Fire was the source of the light for them to do it sort of all hours of the day, but it was also the source of everything that they were able to make thereafter. And, I can tell you the origin of this fire. We don't necessarily know the origin of fire that mankind found, but following Jesus, that people will know about him, about his sacrifice. And we have our own path to follow. We have our own sacrifices to make. And if you just want to turn to that scripture there of 1 Peter, and we'll just read through a couple of scriptures there. And I will just start at the end of, or give you a summary of verse 6, which talks about that we can rejoice and that we have a heaviness, and we're talking about the roller coaster of life, aren't we? We have those moments where we're really on a high, and we have another day where we're really on a low. And it's just a good explanation for us to read through and see what we're going through day by day. But in verse 7 there it says that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honour and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. And verse 8, whom having not seen ye love, in whom though now ye see him not, yet believing, ye rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your souls. The trial of our faith, that again we have an example put before us, don't we, by Jesus Christ and what he lived through, and that the trial of our faith is to be able to follow in those footsteps, that we might actually be able to as it says here, actually be more precious than gold. You know, at the time this was written, that was it. That was the top of the line, the best thing that they could compare it to, and that we can actually be more precious than that by walking on that path. And even though we have those highs and lows in a natural sense, that we still have that ability at the end of the day to be found of having praise and honor and glory in Jesus Christ. That's what people will see in us as we walk that path. As it says, that we haven't seen him personally. We haven't had the chance to bond with him, and yet we've done it anyway, because he's the light of men. He's the light that now dwells within us. That we've come through that trial, and it will give us at the end. It gives us that option of having the salvation of our souls. And for a lot of people that are looking for so many things in the world, and looking for answers, and a question that will cross every person's lips will be, what's the meaning of life? And it's right here that we might actually come to know the living God and actually have salvation for our soul. One of the most amazing things that I like is what white light is actually made of. And, we see light from the sun, and we see it from a multitude of other places, and even a light that's actually a man-made light that's a white light source, that it's actually made of multiple different wavelengths, and they are visible to us as different colours. I think we've all done this in primary school or high school, or just for fun, if you're me. And as the white light we can see on the left here shines through this glass prism, very simple replication of it, but the different wavelengths will bend the different lengths as they go through the prism, and it separates the colours out. And so you get to see the rainbow that comes out the other side. You don't actually get to see the pretty little waves that you see here, but you will see the rainbow that comes out the other side. But this is how light comes in, that we see in this waveform. And, we see from the long wavelengths at the red there, or you can, in a dark room, maybe see infrared, which is just sort of past that, all the way down to the purples, and we can every now and then get the ultraviolet in a dark room, which is just beyond that. And I don't know if you ever tried to walk through a room that's just ultraviolet light, but you almost feel like someone's hit you over the head. It's a little bit odd because we can't really process that as proper light for us to see. But we know that in the times that we have today, that now is the time that we have to find and follow and continue to follow God. And we read in, just a quote from Romans 13 verse 12, that the night is far spent and the day is at hand. Christ's return is the daytime, that's the brightness. And let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armour of light. And what we're talking about here, we'll just read in Galatians, as it says there, Galatians chapter 5, and most of us do know these verses. Although I'm just going to quote to you first verse 14. Just been reading through this with another sister. We've been reading through Galatians just recently, and it was verse 14 that jumped out at us. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even this, that thou shalt love the neighbour as thyself. And that this is the root of everything that Jesus did for us when he fulfilled the law, that he loved us so much that he would give himself for us. And that is the core of the example that we have, that when we live that life, that we actually get the evidence of it, as we read here in verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit, we all know this one, is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. And if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. That we, when you have fruit on a tree, we're starting to grow them, trying to grow fruit trees at home. They're going to take a while. We've got some that have been there for a while. And eventually, after 4 or 5 years of hard work, that the fruit on the tree is actually the evidence of a lot of hard work, a lot of effort, and something that is actually a reward. It's not the tree sort of showing you that it's good. It's the tree actually putting something out that can be used elsewhere. You know, it's a new tree that grows. It's something that gives sustenance to somebody else. And as it is for us, that when we live and walk in the Spirit, that you know, people sort of may not see the white light, if you like. They may see the different colours of the things we do. You know, they may see the gifts of the Spirit in us, that we've been, you know, maybe long suffering, but probably more so that we've got joy. You know, I was always asked why I was smiling at work and this sort of thing, and I actually didn't have an answer. I didn't know I was smiling. And I know there was a brother with a testimony who, as we heard from Jen, he was actually in a really sort of bad position in life, and yet his boss, who was never really nice to anyone, pulled him aside and just said, "I just love it that you turn up to every day, you're so happy." And he thought he was sort of in one of the worst places in his life. And yet, when we live and walk in the Spirit, regardless of what's happening in the natural, people see these colours, you know, as Christ's light shines through us. They see these things that come out and they pick it up. They don't always attribute it to the fact that it's Christ working through us, but it's there, you know, and we know it's there. We know that that's what reflects off us, you know. That's how white light works. When you see a blue curtain, a blue shirt, that's actually blue being reflected back out of the white light. And it's the same things when people see Christ working in us. They see the love reflecting back. They see the joy. And that's the things that Christ is given to us and put into us. This is, I've taken some nice shots down here, but I borrowed this one off of somebody else because they weren't this good. This is down where our Carricklinga campsite is, and Normanville Jetty. And, you know, I like my fiction, my science fiction books, and I have a little bit of an overactive imagination. And this is in my mind's eye of how I see and how I see the spiritual world. That this is us. This is us standing in this world today, and this is what people see when they look at us, and when they are looking for Christ, they see the bright light in the darkness that stands out. And you know, it's something that we don't necessarily aspire to, but once we've got the Holy Spirit, and once we're doing those things that we just read in Galatians, living and walking in the Spirit, it's something that is there, you know. And that's why I just want to read here in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 14. It says, "Ye are the light of the world, and a city that is set on a hill cannot be hid." You know, we're being told exactly what we are in Jesus' own words here. And if we are standing tall for Christ, and again, regardless of what's happening in our life, when we have Christ in here and we're standing tall for what he wants, we are stood up on a hill, and it can't be hid. Mankind can't take that away from any of us and from anyone else. Verse 15, "Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house." And a bushel here is, you know, it's just the same as your 9-litre bucket that you might have at home and carry things around in the garden in. But no one lights a flame and then covers it up. It's completely pointless. And I mean, if you actually seal it well enough, it'll go out anyway. But you know, maybe you cover it up with a blanket and it catches on fire and it just gets worse. But people in this world, they will light something for a greater purpose. It's not just for the candle, but it gives light unto the whole house. It actually helps other people too. And verse 16 there, "So let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works, and then glorify your Father which is in heaven." You know, it's God's light, isn't it? It's Christ's light. That's what we let shine. That's actually what comes forth when we walk with him. It actually allows him to work through us, and that's what stands up for people, and allows what we do to actually show that we're glorifying God. So, you know, for us, as we are the light of the world, it started right back in the beginning of the world. You know, that we had God back there in the beginning, so let there be light. We read about how God brought Jesus into the world, or the story of Jesus, that there would be a light for men to come. We had Jesus showing us the way in his own words. We've had the example of the way that we go through life, we go through trials, we have to be tested in the fire, and that our works are then an example and show evidence of God working in our life. And then we are seen as God's lights. We have his Spirit inside, and that's what shines forth. So I hope that you definitely take something away from those thoughts tonight, that there's a lot more to it than calling ourselves a Christian, that there's a lot more to it than just saying, I go to church on Sundays. And that's what we truly love about what we have here, that people just can't wait to get together and talk about the things of God, and they actually don't wait till they get together. They talk about it in front of everybody else too. And it's just fantastic that we have that joy of the Lord, that we can rejoice. And this last one, I think, is for me. Time to exit. See you later.